Russia's Black Dolphin prison houses some of the country's toughest, most
Opposition figure Alexei Navalny.
The strict regime section and the special regime
became a maximum security prison for dangerous criminals.
On a January morning in Karp, Russia, 60 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, the temperature reads minus 42 Celsius. The sun won't rise today. It won't rise tomorrow either. It hasn't risen in 6 weeks, and it won't for another 3. Inside the concrete barracks of IK-3, a facility known as Polar Wolf, men wake in total darkness to a command they've heard every morning for years. They have minutes to dress, make their beds to military precision, and line up outside for roll call, where the air is cold enough to freeze exposed skin in under 10 minutes. This isn't a documentary about crime or punishment. It's about what happens when you place human beings in an environment that operates at the edge of survival, and then ask them to live there for years. These prisons sit more than 2,000 kilometers from Moscow, surrounded by tundra so vast and frozen that the nearest population center might as well be on another continent. Walls and razor wire are secondary concerns here. The real barrier is geography. The real adversary is the cold. How do you feed people when fresh vegetables can't survive the journey? How do you keep a building warm when the exterior temperature is designed to kill? How does a human body function when it's burning 4,000 calories a day just to stay warm, yet only receiving 2,600? And what happens to the mind when the sun disappears for 2 months, when time itself loses its most basic reference point? This is life inside Russia's remote Arctic prisons, where survival depends not just on navigating incarceration, but on enduring an environment that tests the limits of human physiology every single day.
The only place with any privacy is the toilet.
There are prisons, and then there are prisons built on permafrost. IK-3 Polar Wolf and IK-18 Polar Owl sit in the Yamalo-Nenets region, roughly 60 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. Winter temperatures routinely drop to minus 40 Celsius. Wind chill can push the perceived temperature to minus 50. At that threshold, frostbite begins in under 5 minutes. The facilities themselves are Soviet-era constructions from the 1960s and 70s, brick and concrete panel buildings designed when insulation standards were less of a priority than speed of assembly. The distance from Moscow is over 2,000 kilometers. To reach these prisons, inmates travel for weeks in unheated transport train cars called ETAPs, packed into compartments with barely enough room to sit. The journey itself is a filter. Those who arrive have already endured conditions that would hospitalize most people, but arrival doesn't mean relief. It means the beginning of years spent managing a simple equation. The human body requires a certain baseline of warmth, nutrition, and rest to function. The Arctic removes all three. The tundra surrounding these facilities is impassable for much of the year. In summer, it becomes a swampy bog infested with clouds of midges and mosquitoes so thick they're referred to collectively as gnus, a biblical plague that makes outdoor time unbearable. In winter, it freezes into a flat, wind-scoured plain where nothing grows and no shelter exists for hundreds of miles. This isn't a landscape you can escape into. It's a landscape that enforces confinement more effectively than any guard tower. The perimeter fences are covered with metal grids to prevent helicopter rescues, but the real security is invisible. It's the air temperature. It's the distance. It's the fact that even if you breached the fence, you'd be dead from exposure long before you reached anywhere that mattered. Every building in the Arctic is engaged in a constant battle against entropy. Heat leaks out through cracks, through windows, through the molecular structure of the walls themselves. The boiler house at the center of each prison is what keeps that battle from being lost. It runs continuously, burning fuel to pump hot water through radiators distributed across the barracks, the cafeteria, and the workshops. If it fails, if the fuel runs out, if a pipe bursts, if the machinery breaks down, the interior temperature begins dropping immediately. Within hours, the building becomes uninhabitable. The construction itself works against this effort. Concrete and brick, especially the Soviet-grade materials used in these facilities, conduct cold efficiently. During extreme cold snaps, frost doesn't just form on the exterior walls, it accumulates on the interior surfaces. Inmates wake to find hoarfrost coating the walls beside their bunks. The moisture comes from their own breath, condensing and freezing overnight. Windows are barred for security, but they're also drafty. Gaps in the frames let in streams of freezing air. Inmates improvise caulking using whatever materials they can find. Rags torn from old clothing, plastic bags, even breadcrumbs pressed into cracks and left to harden. The goal is simple: trap every bit of heat inside. But this creates a secondary problem. Sealing the windows eliminates ventilation. The barracks house 60 to 100 men in spaces that give each person roughly 2 square meters of floor space. With no air exchange, the atmosphere becomes thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, damp wool, and tobacco smoke. Moisture from breathing and sweating has nowhere to go, so it condenses on the cold walls and breeds mold. Inmates have no control over the radiators. Temperature regulation is handled entirely by the administration. The result is a building that's either dangerously cold or suffocatingly hot, depending on whether the boiler is being underfired to save fuel or overfired to compensate for heat loss through the degrading building envelope. In punishment isolation cells, the SHIZO, radiators are often insufficient or absent. Some inmates report radiators that are painted on the walls, a visual suggestion of heating that provides nothing. In those rooms, the interior temperature can drop to 10 or 15 degrees Celsius, cold enough to make sleep nearly impossible, cold enough to induce constant shivering, which burns calories the body doesn't have to spare. Every morning begins with roll call. This is standard across most prisons, a head count, a verification that everyone is accounted for. But in the Arctic, roll call is a survival test. Inmates line up outside in formation. They stand at attention. They wait. The duration varies. 30 minutes on a routine day. Hours if there's a discrepancy in the count, if someone is late, or if the administration decides discipline needs reinforcing. The temperature is typically minus 35 degrees Celsius or colder. The uniform is a dark cotton synthetic blend with a bushlat pea coat for winter and a fur ushanka hat. The boots are kirza, imitation leather with thin soles. They conduct cold upward from the frozen ground directly into the feet. Standing still in extreme cold is harder than moving. When you walk or work, your muscles generate heat as a byproduct of motion. When you stand motionless, the body has only one tool left: shivering. It's an involuntary muscle contraction designed to produce warmth through friction. It works, but it's metabolically expensive. Shivering burns between 300 and 600 calories per hour, depending on the severity of the cold and the individual's body mass. The daily diet in these prisons provides roughly 2,600 calories. That number comes from official regulations. The actual usable caloric content is often lower due to spoilage, undercooking, or low-quality ingredients. But even if we accept the official figure, it's still catastrophically insufficient. In extreme cold, the human body requires over 4,000 calories per day just to maintain core temperature and basic metabolic function. The deficit is more than 1,000 calories every single day. This isn't hunger in the traditional sense. Hunger is acute discomfort. This is a chronic energy bankruptcy. The body begins breaking down fat stores, then muscle tissue. Weight loss is rapid. But the more weight you lose, the worse the problem becomes because subcutaneous fat acts as insulation. The thinner you get, the faster you lose heat, which means the next roll call will require even more shivering to stay warm, burning even more calories you don't have. It's a feedback loop with no exit. Logistics in the Arctic operate on a completely different timeline than in temperate regions. Supplies arrive through a system called the Northern Delivery, Severny Zavos in Russian. It happens in bulk shipments during the narrow window when rivers are navigable in summer, or via temporary ice roads in winter that exist only when the tundra is frozen solid enough to support heavy trucks. These brief logistics windows define the entire year. If a shipment is delayed by weather or a barge misses its slot, there is no fallback. The community and all dependent institutions simply go without until the next season. Administrators spend months forecasting consumption, calculating fuel and food requirements with near paranoid precision because a single miscalculation can cascade into shortages that last for weeks. Every screw, every filter, every spare part arrives on this schedule. Nothing is quick, nothing is immediate. Fresh produce has to travel over 2,000 kilometers from distribution centers near Moscow. The journey takes weeks. In winter, transport vehicles are unheated. Vegetables freeze solid in transit. Upon arrival, they're either completely inedible or partially thawed and rotting from freeze-thaw cycles that rupture cell walls. In summer, the lack of refrigeration during transport means spoilage begins immediately. Either way, fresh food is a logistical impossibility. The prison defaults to what can survive the journey: grains, canned goods, root vegetables like potatoes and beets, and frozen meat. These ingredients sit in storage rooms that function more like survival caches than kitchens, stocked with items chosen not for taste but for durability. Breakfast is kasha, a porridge made from oats or millet boiled in water, sometimes with a small amount of milk added. The bread is heavy, damp, and underbaked. Inmates describe it as having the consistency of plasticine, malleable, dense, capable of being molded like clay. Lunch is balanda, a soup that's mostly water with floating cabbage leaves and potato skins. Occasionally, there are fish bones or unidentifiable meat-like fillers. Dinner is boiled potatoes or pasta. Portions are small, predictable, and monotonous, designed to meet minimal caloric requirements rather than provide comfort or variety. The protein source is frozen venison, often described as black due to its color and low grade. Deer meat that's been stored improperly or too long becomes tough, gamey, and sometimes rancid. It's the cheapest available protein in the region, and it tastes like it. Inmates often try to mask the bitterness by drowning it in tea or swallowing it quickly, but the flavor lingers. Many describe the aftertaste as metallic, almost medicinal. Without vitamin C, the body begins to break down. Scurvy symptoms develop over months. Gums start bleeding, teeth loosen in their sockets. The only fresh vitamins come from family packages, onions and garlic that relatives send during approved delivery windows. These are rare, rationed carefully, and traded as valuable commodities within the prison economy. A single bulb of garlic can circulate through half the barracks, shaved down and shared like contraband gold. Water is another problem. Tap water in the region has high mineral content and rust from decades-old pipes. It must be boiled before drinking. Tea is the primary beverage, but not the kind you'd recognize. Chifir is a super concentrated brew made by steeping massive amounts of tea leaves for extended periods. It's not about flavor, it's about caffeine, a stimulant to keep alert during long work shifts, and an appetite suppressant to make the caloric deficit slightly more tolerable. Over time, drinking chifir becomes less a choice and more a survival strategy, a ritual that helps inmates endure the exhaustion, hunger, and cold that define daily life in the Arctic. In late November, the sun drops below the horizon and doesn't return. This is the polar night. It lasts until mid-January, roughly 6 to 8 weeks of total darkness. There is no sunrise. There is no sunset. There is no dawn, no dusk, no twilight gradient to mark the passage of time. There is only darkness or artificial light. Inmates wake in darkness. They march to roll call in darkness. They work in workshops lit by fluorescent bulbs. They return to barracks in darkness. The schedule continues as it always has. Wake at 5 a.m., breakfast at 6:30 a.m., lights out at 10 p.m. But these times become arbitrary checkpoints in a void. Without the sun to segment a day into morning, afternoon, and evening, the concept of a day becomes abstract. Human biology is not designed for this. The circadian rhythm, the internal clock that regulates sleep, hormone production, mood, and cognition, depends on external light cues. Sunlight triggers the suppression of melatonin, the hormone that makes you feel sleepy. Darkness triggers its release. In the polar night, this system fails. Melatonin production becomes erratic. Even during mandatory lights out, when inmates are required to close their eyes and lie motionless, sleep is fragmented. The brain doesn't know when it's supposed to be asleep. Vitamin D synthesis requires ultraviolet light exposure. In the absence of sunlight, the body stops producing it entirely. Vitamin D is essential for immune function, bone health, and mood regulation. Its absence leads to a suite of problems: increased susceptibility to infection, bone pain, and a psychological crushing sensation that inmates describe as polar dyspnea, a feeling of air hunger, of being suffocated even though oxygen levels are normal. Depression spikes, time perception distorts. Inmates report that days blur together, that entire weeks vanish from memory because there's nothing to distinguish one day from the next. The rigid prison schedule, wake, roll call, meals, work, lights out, becomes the only temporal structure. It's an external clock imposed by force, but it can't replicate what the sun provides. The brain needs natural light to remain oriented in time. Without it, the sense of being anchored in reality begins to slip. When exterior temperatures drop at -30 degrees Celsius and stay there for extended periods, the water pipes freeze. These are Soviet-era pipes, often poorly insulated or running through unheated crawl spaces. Ice forms inside the pipe, blocking flow. Running water stops. The freeze happens silently at first, a small blockage, a narrowing of the pipe. Then suddenly the entire system locks up, leaving entire sectors without water overnight. This can last for days, sometimes weeks. The official response is to ration water deliveries, barrels brought in by truck and distributed to the barracks. Inmates also melt snow in makeshift containers, though this requires heat, which requires fuel, which is itself rationed. Boiling snow produces water, but the mineral content and potential contaminants remain. Even melted snow tastes metallic, carrying the residue of smoke, soot, and whatever debris settled on the surface before collection. The administration also uses water as a punishment tool. Even when the pipes are functional, hot water can be restricted. The weekly bath day, where each inmate gets 10 to 15 minutes in a communal shower, is a baseline hygiene event. When it's canceled due to maintenance issues, the result is predictable. Body odor accumulates, skin infections spread. The air in the overcrowded barracks becomes even more unbearable. The cancellation is never announced in advance. Inmates often line up outside in the cold, only to be turned away. When water service is restored, there's a rush to use it. Inmates shower as quickly as possible, knowing the window might close again without warning. But the walk back from the bathhouse to the barracks is dangerous. It's -35 Celsius outside. Hair is wet, clothes are damp. The distance might only be 50 meters, but it's enough. Pneumonia cases spike after bath days. So do cases of meningitis, which thrives when the immune system is already weakened by cold and malnutrition. The infrastructure failure doesn't require deliberate cruelty to function as punishment. Neglect is enough. The system was built decades ago in an environment that degrades everything faster than it can be repaired. Pipes freeze, boilers break down, buildings leak heat, ventilation systems fail and stay broken for months, and the population inside has no choice but to adapt or suffer the consequences. Punishment isolation in a standard prison is social deprivation, removed from the general population, placed in a small cell, denied human contact. In an Arctic prison, isolation is all of that plus controlled hypothermia. The SHIZO cell is roughly 2 meters by 3 meters. Concrete walls, concrete floor, a small barred window, a steel door with a kormushka, a small flap through which food bowls are shoved. The cell is kept intentionally cold. Temperatures range from 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. That's 50 to 59 Fahrenheit. Cold enough that sitting still becomes painful. Cold enough that sleep is nearly impossible. Inmates are forbidden from bringing their winter coat or warm socks into SHIZO. They wear only the standard thin cotton uniform. The bunk is folded up and locked to the wall at 0500 each morning. It doesn't come down until 2100 hours, 16 hours later. During those 16 hours, the inmate must either stand or sit on a small wooden stool. There is no lying down. There is no resting. The body cannot conserve heat because it cannot curl up or insulate itself. Once per day, the inmate is allowed 1 hour in the walking yard. This is a concrete box slightly larger than the cell, with a metal mesh roof. The roof is open to the sky. Snow falls through. Rain falls through. The temperature is the same as the exterior, -30, -40, whatever the weather dictates. It's called a walking yard, but it's essentially a smaller, colder cell with fresh air. At IK3 Polar Wolf, there are documented reports of water cannon incidents. Inmates are brought outside in winter and doused with a fire hose. The water is under pressure. It soaks through clothing instantly, and then it freezes. At -30 Celsius, water doesn't stay liquid on fabric. It forms an ice shell. The inmate is trapped inside a frozen uniform, unable to remove it, unable to move freely. The ice conducts cold directly to the skin. Hypothermia sets in rapidly. This isn't a side effect of the climate. It's the climate weaponized. Cold becomes a precision tool for punishment, requiring no special equipment, no violence in the traditional sense, just water, sub-zero air, and time. The same isolation that makes escape impossible also makes medical care nearly impossible. The facility has a medical unit, but it's minimal. Basic painkillers, antiseptics, and bandages. There's no surgical equipment. There's no imaging. If an inmate develops appendicitis, a hernia, or internal bleeding, the only option is transport. The ETAP system moves prisoners between facilities using specialized train cars. The cars are unheated. They're overcrowded. The journey from CARP to a prison hospital in another region can take 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the route and the availability of space on trains. Many inmates die in transit. The conditions are worse than the prison they're leaving. Less food, less space, no medical monitoring. An acute condition becomes a death sentence simply because of the distance involved. Supply chains face the same problem. The northern delivery is the only way to bring in bulk goods, and it happens once, maybe twice per year, during the short window when rivers are navigable or ice roads are passable. If a delivery is missed, the facility operates on stockpiles. Fresh food is already impossible due to the transit time. But even non-perishables become scarce if the logistics fail. The tundra is cheap security. Fewer guards are needed because the environment does most of the work. But that same remoteness makes everything else expensive. Expensive in lives, expensive in suffering, expensive in the slow attrition of bodies that can't be maintained on the resources available. The system accepts this. There's no evacuation plan for when infrastructure fails. There's no emergency resupply protocol. The calculus is clear. Remote incarceration is about removing populations from oversight. The tundra doesn't just keep inmates in, it keeps observers out. What happens in the polar night, 2,000 kilometers from Moscow, happens in a void that most people will never see and most institutions will never inspect. The cold is constant. The isolation is total. And the margin between survival and collapse is measured in calories, in degrees, in the hours a human body can stand outside before it stops shivering and starts shutting down. The Arctic doesn't care about guilt or innocence. It doesn't care about sentences or crimes. It only cares about physics, how much heat a body can generate, how much a building can retain, how many calories a person can consume before the system starts breaking itself down for fuel. These prisons don't just punish. They test the absolute lower boundary of what a human being can endure when every system meant to support life is operating at the edge of failure. The men inside these facilities are surviving in an environment that most of us will never experience and can barely imagine. They're managing a daily negotiation with cold, with hunger, with darkness, with the knowledge that the infrastructure keeping them alive is one breakdown away from catastrophe. That's not a metaphor. That's the operational reality of incarceration in the Arctic, where the real adversary isn't the guards or the walls. It's the latitude itself, and the unforgiving physics of heat loss in a place where warmth is the only currency that matters.